So, unlike the previous video, I'm going to try to be topical this time. And what I've been thinking a lot about is reactivity in art. And I mean that is in like trying to make your work, but in the process of making work, you're actually reacting to life situations, experiences, things you see or somehow have influenced you in some way, and you're reacting to them, and the different reactions that I've had over the course of my life. Because in hindsight, and this is one of those things that, like, in an arts career, it's sort of ironic. You can't foresee the fact that hindsight will make a huge difference, because most of the time when I'm looking at my artwork and trying to come up with an artist statement and doing all the other sort of mandatory things in the arts world, I realize that 5 years after I'm done with a set of work, when I look back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that was about this thing that happened. But I was unaware of it at the time. And so it's that sort of knowledge of time and distance being an important element in being able to figure out the reactivity, like what you're reacting to. That's something that I think is very important, because there are lots of different issues, like between the scale you work. You know, if you have a small apartment, you work small. You have a big studio, you work big. If you have lots of money, you work with, higher priced, higher quality materials. You have less money, you use, lower price, lower. So every choice you make in your artistic career is a reaction to some scenario that is impacting your life, and therefore, as a knock-on effect, impacting your artwork. So, and by the way, no stretch of the imagination am I saying that any of this is bad. It's just, it's a fact about you and about your work that should be taken into consideration when you think about what your work was talking about, what it was reacting to, why it was reacting that way, so on and so on and so on. So, though my videos are going to be a bit rambling, I will start with that as my topic, and I will try my best to stay on point. Though I am a storyteller, so bear with my stories, because my stories will meander, but I hope that they will all come back to the topic in the end. So now that I figured out the format I'm going to be doing, so this is my little intro, and then I'm just going to go into making my art and talking while I'm making my art, and hopefully it stays on topic. So enjoy. So when I think of the first story I can think of when I think of reacting to was when I went to graduate school. I showed up at master's. Wow, that's really dark. I showed up in my master's program with the intent of being a photographer. I'd applied for an MFA in photography, and I showed up at the San Francisco Art Institute with full expectations of going into photography. And I got into the first course, which was Linda Connor, and it was, or Linda Connor was the memorable person, I should say, in the room. I don't know if it was her class. And when I showed up, basically the first thing they had us do was put up a sample of our work in the studio, and so I put up my work. And Linda just sort of walks over to me, sort of very quietly in the corner, and whispers, sort of, like, basically she didn't want to say it in front of the whole class, but she sort of whispers to me. She's like, your work is very fashion oriented. Are you sure you should be in art school? And all the first reaction in my mind was, fuck you. Like, why would you say that? Why would that be the first interaction that you want to have with a brand new student? Like, that really sort of sets the tone very poorly in my impression. And I was so pissed at her that I just became so adamant to stay at that school and to, like, really, really do well, because it just really upset me. Don't get me wrong, because if you saw my work, you'd probably be like, oh yeah, it's very fashion oriented. I mean, it really was. So I'm not questioning her observation was dead on. It absolutely was very fashion oriented, but that just because something is one thing doesn't mean that it can't be more than just that thing. I mean, these days, fashion, Richard Avedon and Herb Ritts and all these people are all shown at the Museum of Modern Art and all other kinds of places. So just because something is sort of an oeuvre doesn't mean it can't expand beyond that. The idea that fashion photography can't be anything more than fashion photography, I sort of was a bit upset about, and so that reaction of mine to tell her to fuck off, which I did not say. I just want to be really clear. It was all in my mind, but boy, in my mind, I was furious at her. I mean, I had just left Washington, D.C., moved all the way across the country to San Francisco, where I knew nobody. And I literally just walked into my first class, and in my first class, the professor basically questioned whether or not I wanted or deserved, I guess, is how I interpreted it, to be there. And that's just really just irked me. And it irked me so badly that I switched my major from photography to new genre. And in the end, I feel that the new genre education was magnificent, because one of the things that I did not appreciate about, and still to this day really don't appreciate about a lot of photographers, is that when you get a bunch of photographers in a room, they talk about lenses and light and paper and basically all these sort of material objects of sort of fetishized about, like, ooh, what kind of lens did you use with that? What aperture are you using with that? And I remember distinctly one time that I think it was this guy Erez Golan in our class, and he just turned, he goes, what does it really matter? Like, who cares what lens somebody used or what aperture you shot it at? Like, it doesn't really matter. The question, once an image is created, is does it affect you as a viewer? And so it's that sort of feedback that sort of led me into the new genre program, because the new genre program at the San Francisco Art Institute, which is RIP, now defunct, but was very much based in the idea of like, you come up with a creative idea, so an artistic intention, a concept, a purpose, whatever term you want to put to it, and then you use whatever medium is necessary. So like at any given time when I walked into a classroom, it could be a performance that's being critiqued, or a paintings, or sculpture, or a book, or printmaking, or a video installation, or whatever. And we as students needed to learn to talk about art. And because most of us were of different mediums, like, my background was photography at the time, and people in there were performance and videographers and all kinds of different sort of mediums, we never had conversations like, what lens length did you use? What shutter speed or aperture are you using with this? We talked about whether or not the work impacted us in some way. And that really is, in the end, I feel, the importance of art. The how you create it is important in the way that you want to put intention and purpose and thought and planning into trying to construct the most impactful version of whatever you're trying to say that will get the viewers sympathy, empathy, attention, whatever thing you're seeking from them, that it will garner that result or that feedback. And that's the hard part. But yeah, so I ended up in the new genre program because Linda Connor pissed me off, basically. It was, in many ways, I was very upset with Linda for many years, but I know it wasn't her fault. And it might have just been her intention to sort of push me. But at that moment in time, I think she just sort of pushed me a little too hard, and I reacted poorly to it. Equally so, I remember being in my undergraduate, boy, I got a lot of these sort of back and forth with professors, but well, in my undergraduate program, I had I had Frank DePerna. Sorry, Frank DePerna. And Frank was of a very specific style and of a very specific time period, as most professors are. And I don't fit with him. Our styles differed greatly, but that is kind of irrelevant because he was still my professor, and so I had to, listen to him at least, give him the benefit of the doubt. But at one point, I was doing a lot of work where I was using text. I had a I had a habit of basically making these very vague, open-ended, sort of open to interpretation, like, oh, it's a universal idea and everybody will understand it, kind of pompous bullshit that we all make when we're young. And Frank kept getting on my case time and time again. Like every time we did a critique, he would always be like, using text with your photography, because I was getting a photography degree at the Corcoran, so it was a photography course. And he used to say that using text in your photograph was a crutch. It was basically, if I used text in my imagery, that I was unable to successfully convey my idea through my image, and so therefore I felt the need to use text to sort of fill in the extra information, the extra context that I was unable to or unwilling to put in the effort to put into the imagery. And I kept saying, no, the point is the sort of the romantic, the poetic, the open to interpretation. I mean, even my text, the images were vague and sort of like somebody described it as like the look of coming home drunk at 4 a.m. And so how everything's sort of soft and hazy and dark and moody. That's how some of my fellow students describe the imagery, which is probably pretty dead on. But then the text was often very sort of open-ended also, and very sort of generic and romantic, and sort of all the tropes that, as I said, we all do in our youth, because to a certain extent we just don't have enough experiences to have the ability to write or sort of express anything necessarily specific, because we're just working off of concepts still, like lost love, like we think we've loved, but like when you get older, then really what love and loss of love is. But in your 20s, you think you know what it is, but you don't. And so Frank kept on and on and on, and telling me like, oh, you should not use text. Try and figure out a way to put more information into the image. And I kept reacting, saying, no, that's not what I want to do. And so, that being said, about 10 years later, I was teaching at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And when I was in a classroom, I had a student turn in some work that was vague and open-ended and sort of soft focus and open to interpretation, and all the same tropes that I did and I was sort of like, oh, there's this very familiar, this is very nice, it seems to be a common thing that people of this age all go through, and that I sort of felt a kinship to it in that way. But he used text to try and sort of add additional layers to the purpose of the work in the same way that I did. And I heard myself say, well, the use of text is a bit of a crutch. It basically implies that you couldn't put in the information or the context that you wanted. Literally, like I basically verbatim said what Frank said to me 10 years prior to this student, and I was just like, oh shit, he was so right. Like, he was so right. And so that then led to, I happened to be back in Washington, D.C. where the Corcoran is, about a year or so after that student interaction, that I basically said the same thing that he said to me. And I happened to just coincidentally run into Frank at an art event. And I literally walked up to him and I said, Frank, I need to tell you that I'm sorry for what I didn't listen to you about. And like, I explained to him the whole thing, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember that. You were really adamant towards it. And I'm like, yeah, I know I was. And after reflection, after 10 years of time and distance, you were right. And so I got to apologize to him. And so that was really a nice full circle. But it took 10 years. And that's one of the difficult parts of that I feel about being an artist, is a lot of times you don't really know why you're making something, or even why you're sort of opinionated about something. Like, why did I even give a shit? Why was I fighting him so hard? Why couldn't I just listen to him and learn from him instead of fight with him? Because I probably could have progressed substantially more with my work had I listened to his feedback and tried it and done more with it, rather than dig my heels in. And so there's a bit of a lost opportunity that I have there, but I do feel it felt good, actually. I think because like a year or so after Frank and I had my mea culpa apology to him, he passed away. So I'm very happy that I was able to get the opportunity to say it to him and give him the satisfaction of having been right. Because as a teacher, it is actually nice to, even after a decade, hear that not only were you encouraging a student to do the right thing, but that at some point, even if it took 10 years, they heard you. And so that was a nice, I think it was a nice gesture on my part to him. I hope he appreciated it. I don't know, but it felt good for me to give that to him because, well, he was right and I was wrong, because I was an arrogant little shit in my youth and I was unwilling and unable to listen to his advice. And yeah, boy, times change. So that's an important aspect of sort of being reactionary, is like, don't react emotionally in that way. And that's actually, interestingly enough, that brings me to one of my big things that I have, that I do in my classroom at all times, and in what I do anytime I'm generally discussing artwork, specifically with the artist, is I try. Well, in my classroom, I tell my students when they're doing a critique, there are 3 words, but sort of generalized sort of concepts that they're not allowed to do or say, which is I, me, and my. I feel like anytime somebody is doing a critique of somebody, the reason why this sort of fits with reaction and reactionary stuff is because of the fact that when you say, I think your work does blankety blank, people get, the person hearing this critique will get defensive. They'll feel attacked, and so they will then oftentimes not hear what you're saying anymore, because they've just sort of gotten into fight or flight mode, and they got their spine up and they're tingling, and they don't want to hear anything more from you once you've already sort of offended them. So trying your best when you're talking about art, specifically art of a sort of a living artist who maybe you're standing right in front of, or you're doing a critique of, if you want to talk about Van Gogh and say, oh, I don't like it, that's fine, he's dead, he doesn't care. But if you're trying to talk about it sort of intellectually and sort of to understand the works, trying to stay away from the terms I, me, and my is generally helpful, because it removes the subjectivity and it makes it more objective of a feedback the more objective you can be, the more that people, specifically like artists hearing feedback, will not get offended or upset or feel attacked or anything like that. So they're, and if you say these colors don't work as coherently as they might if this one was deeper or richer or the tone was different, being more sort of objective about it and literally just sort of giving direct feedback that is constructive and helpful is exponentially more beneficial to a critique, because people don't get upset when you give sort of objective feedback, because they don't feel like they've been attacked in a subjective way. Therefore, i.e., going back to the topic, they don't react in sort of maybe the way I did when Frank gave me like I don't like the text, so trying to stay away from that is beneficial when discussing art with other artists or critics or whatever, anybody. I, me, and my. Stay away from it. It's bad. Some of my experiences early in my career anyways, of reactionary artwork is not the kind of stuff that like people would refer to as reactionary. Like I'm not political. I don't get into these things. I mean, I've got my political positions, but I'm not a big fan of doing political art. It's not my style. It's not my thing. Probably because I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and so like I sort of had my fill of politics back then, and I just didn't feel the need to do political art. Partly that, but partly also like the thing about political art that I always noticed was that it was always, oh yeah, well that was because of this, like it was of its time, like it didn't have a timeless aspect to it the way that I liked my art to try to have, or I should even say like the work that I appreciated. So when I went to a museum, I appreciated timeless work, not work that always had to have sort of a disclaimer of like, oh well that was made during this time period and when this was an issue, and so like you needed to learn history and politics in order to understand and appreciate the work of the within that time period and all that. So that's not my thing. But reactionary, like when I was in Ohio at Bowling Green, I was teaching and I was living in this really, really small town. Like there were 500 full-time residents. So like it was a really tiny town, and it was called Huron. And I was very lonely, and it was a time that I had left. The easiest way I could explain it is like I had left my childhood home, but I hadn't found sort of my adult home. I hadn't. I'm not sure what it was, but basically I hadn't become an adult. I hadn't bought a house or gotten a spouse and sort of settled down and all that. Still haven't. Well, I got a spouse, but not really settled down yet. But we're close. I'm close to settling down. But the reaction is that like I felt a longing for that thing, and so I tried to make some work, and it was I think they're called longing landscapes. It was about this sort of desire for a home. Now, did the work? I mean, the work was crazy because like this emotional impact on me was sort of a very spur of the moment thing. I was feeling very emotional at a certain time. I think it was around the time that the girl who was my first love was getting married, and I just found out about it, and I was like, she's able to find that settled down thing, but I can't seem to find it. And I was like, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I find it? But and all that comes along with that. But the reactionary nature of it was that, I went out and in the span of like one weekend, I rented a bunch of equipment, infrared filters and tilt shift lenses and high-end digital cameras, and went out and did this photo shoot that was in the freezing cold snow in the dead of winter, having to trek through snow that was up to my knees with all this equipment, and took these pictures, and they were like they were the first work that I ever did that was just like, I feel this way, I need to make these images there. And it was sort of one and done. Like I felt this way, needed to share it, and I got it done, and I never revisited it because it was a reaction to that emotional thing that was going on at that time in my life. And sometimes that's what your art is. It's just a reaction. I mean, is it like therapy? No, because nothing got resolved, nothing got worked out by it. It was just, I needed to express this longing. Along with that sort of reactionary impact of my work, and I think this happens with a lot of people too, is the resources that are available to you. Like, I can't tell you how many times, almost every time I like change jobs or it's pretty much just change jobs, but mostly it's like change living situations, change jobs, whatever. So like if I have a bigger house or bigger apartment, I will make bigger work. If I have a smaller place, I'll make smaller work. If I have more money, so on, so on, so on. But it's not just that. It's also what resources I have available to me. Like, when I was in the UAE, there were certain equipment that I had available to me that I did not have available prior to being there, and now post being there. And in the same way, like, there's certain aspects of like previous employments or previous places I've lived that have offered me sort of certain resources. And I find that that's one of the big things that happens. Like, I mean, in certain ways, like you hear about people moving to, let's say, New Mexico or Arizona, and then suddenly they're potters. Like, why are they potters? Because there's a lot of resources to be able to do pottery there. Like, there's the equipment, there's the venues to sell it and exhibit it, there's all the different opportunities that come around it. So the opportunity of resources and the willingness to, I'm not gonna say like necessarily engage in them, but like let them lead you in some way, can be a very beneficial attribute to an artist's career. Like, so, like when I was in the UAE, they bought a robot, like a CNC robot. It cost like $1 million. It was ridiculous. The only person that ever used it was Thornton, the guy who bought it, basically. The one full professor on that campus that was like, oh, we need this. Well, he just needed it for his PhD thesis, and that's it. The students didn't need it. They didn't even ask for it. But anyways, there's a lot of that stuff around. So the point being is that taking advantage of resources. Like when I was at Bowling Green State, they had just bought, at the time, it was sort of very high end, like this really nice big flatbed Epson scanner, and they had this beautiful big Epson 42-inch or 44-inch wide printer. And so I ended up just using that to my heart's content. I would print out these huge prints and then scan them and then re-put them together and then reprint them and then scan them. And like, I mean, basically one of the fun things about being a creative person, and I keep calling myself a creative person, not an artist. And I go back and forth on this, but because in many ways, a lot of us talk about that basically the term artist is not something you should call yourself. It's something that somebody else should call you. And that's sort of a snobby way of sort of getting at it, but it's kind of true because an artist is an earned title, not something that I can just sit around and go, I'm an artist. Other people have to say that I'm an artist. So I call myself a creative person, mostly because it's also sort of like the term of the this time period as well. God, I hope I never call myself a content creator, but I'm a creative person. But point being is that when you have resources available to you, like the ability to find ways when resources are available to make them to your advantage, basically. So like if you have the opportunity to use XYZ equipment, even if it's not your thing, or you have resources of, I'm trying to think what other kind of, like if there happens to be a community darkroom near you, or a pottery studio with open hours kind of thing. Like, take advantage of these things. You never know how they can turn around and impact your sort of main thing, because being a creative person, being an artist, is not a linear path. It's not, I am this, hear me roar, I will do this thing from now until when I die. It is, you're always being influenced by things, by experiences, by opportunities, by whatever. And so being willing to, utilize and incorporate all these different things throughout your career to try to find your voice, the thing that makes you feel like you are expressing your idea in the most appropriate manner, whatever that is. I can't tell you how many photographers I know from my youth who are now painters, printmakers, potters, and vice versa. A lot of painters who are now photographers, and so on and so on. So a lot of these kinds of things ebb and flow depending on your personal interests, not even necessarily at the time, but sort of opportunities that are offered to you, and being flexible enough to figure out how they can be integrated into your creative life is really, really beneficial. So, basically being sort of like overly, boy, this is going back to like me being that arrogant little shit at the Corcoran, but like being open to things and being willing to let life guide you, and listen to things, listen to opportunities, listen to guidance, listen to whatever kind of thing that is placed in front of you is of the utmost importance, because part of being an artist is also, boy, I'm calling myself an artist, but I'm calling you all an artist, but part of being an artist is to be flexible, but not just flexible. It's actually sort of, I refer to it as like evolutionary. Like, I feel like, and this is going to be, boy, I'm going to get grief for this one, but I feel like if you're doing it right, so if you're really living a very creative life and lifestyle, you will change, you will evolve, you will grow with your life experiences, your knowledge, or whatever. Like, for instance, when I go back and I'm thinking about abstraction, boy, I am just rambling, but when I think about abstraction, when I was a kid, and to a certain extent even now, like I don't feel like students should work abstractly. I feel like abstraction is something that is sort of earned through time and experience, because if you don't understand, or if you don't have a mastery over a thing, how do you know how, why, and when to abstract it? So I feel like abstraction is something that comes with, we'll call it wisdom or age and time. Well, time and distance, maybe, I guess, going back to that same thematic idea. But the nature of abstraction is something that comes with time. If you start at abstraction, where do you go from there for the rest of your career? There's not really much you can do other than sort of maybe go back to realism. So starting out in the beginning of your career in one place and then growing from there, basically having some way to grow and being willing to grow and evolve. I know all too many artists who like found a thing when they were in their 20s and they're now in their 50s and 60s and they're still doing that same thing. And in many ways, like, good for them if it works for them. Then that's great. It's not the life I want to lead. While I can look back over my career and I can see a very good, strong thread through line between all my work, that there's a consistency that even if it's a different medium or a different decade or whatever, you can still see a consistency that is sort of my impression, my fingerprint on a thing that says, oh, that was made by you. So that's what I think you should be striving for. And it doesn't happen quickly. It happens over the course of many bodies of work and many decades. And I didn't know that as a kid. I wish I did. Probably would have done some things differently. No, I certainly would have done some things differently. I would have been nicer. When I say I would have been nicer, it's not that I wasn't nice, but I had this preconceived idea that being an artist was about a certain thing, and I thought it was about merit, but it's not. A lot of the arts industry is actually about friends and connections and all that kind of jazz, and I dropped the ball on that one. Because I focused too much on trying to make quality and high merit work and not so much on the interpersonal relationships. And now at 50, I'm looking back, or not looking back, I'm looking at other people in the industry right now and I'm realizing, oh shit, it's all about interpersonal relationships. It's all about your friends, the people you went to school with who are now curators and gallery owners and collectors and whatever, and I didn't make friends with them. So you should make friends, true friends, not friends you're going to use or manipulate or do anything like that, but like make friends when you're young and keep in touch with those friends, because those friends are going to be the people who they're going to lean on you, you're going to lean on them, they're going to ask favors of you, you're going to ask favors of them. That's a huge mistake that I made. I wish I could go back and change that, but unfortunately I can't. But I can try to do better moving forward, and that's really what it's all about, is learning from your mistakes and trying not to repeat them. But back to reactionary work, there are a lot of benefits to it, but there's a lot of potential pitfalls, and trying to find that right balance is the trick. And so I'm the kind of person who in my youth was very reactionary. I was like a knee-jerk reaction, like, you messed with me, you got the bull, kind of stupid shit. I mean, not literally. I wasn't like a fighter or anything like that. More of a lover. But the result is sort of the same. Like when people would upset me, I'd be done with them. I wouldn't give second chances. I mean, I was horrible. But I'm hoping to be better than I was. And a lot of it is quite honestly, is in a reaction to the fact that my older brother, my only brother, recently, well, about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, died rather suddenly. And sort of left me alone as the only child. And it was never meant to be that way. It was always going to be like me and my brother, even though we fought endlessly. It was he and I against the world, but now that's gone. It's not that I won, but that camaraderie is gone. But what that sort of encouraged me to investigate more was the nature of the complexity of our relationship. He and I, we loved and hated each other simultaneously, as most siblings do, and that then led me to look into the complexity of other relationships, and then complexity of my own relationships to things and to people, and to places and to times, and sort of renegotiate my position. And this is, again, sort of reactionary. So I'm not even sure where I'm going with this, to be honest, because I'm still in the middle of reacting to that one. So let me come back to that at a later time. Let's get back to some past story of reactions, because I have enough time and distance to sort of maybe fully understand those a bit better. I would say the one overarching reaction I've always had in my career is that I have had and probably still do have a position that I don't like how the arts industry exists. There are many different arts industries. I get all that. Like there's the secondary market. There's the galleries. There are so many different layers to it, but it never feels like it's about merit. And I always wanted it to be about merit. And I have fought tooth and nail to be about trying to produce the highest quality of something. And I've probably failed miserably at that particular thing. But that's been my attempt. That's been my intention. And I wish I had, in hindsight, been more accepting of the reality of it instead of reacting to it and taking an active fighting stance. Not really a fighting stance, but a what's a better term for it? A questioning stance. I've always wondered, nobody's been able to explain to me why it is the way it is. And if I don't know the answer to why the way something is, it's really hard for me to go, oh, okay, great, then I'll do that. And so if somebody could explain to me why the arts world works this way, I probably would be much more accepting of it. And because everybody just sort of waves their hand and goes, well, that's the way it is, that's the way it's always been, it's not going to change just because you want it to change. I want it to change, but to a certain extent, I'm not sure I want it to change, but I guess I just really want to understand why it exists in the format and the manner that it does exist. And if somebody could explain that to me in a way that I could comprehend, understand, and integrate, then I would probably sort of disagree with it and fight against it less. But unfortunately, everybody's sort of open-ended and vague about it, and it just sort of always irked me. And I wish there were some consistency to it, something that's not basically the whims of the buyers and the interest of the public kind of thing, and there was something a bit more concrete. But on the flip side of that, maybe that is the beauty of it. So I can't say it's a problem, but I just kind of wish that I didn't feel the need to actively rebel against a thing simply because I didn't understand it. Understanding it is not necessary for me to be able to participate in it. And sadly, it's taken me this long to learn this.